Son persuades me to enter a care home, then changes the locks after I move out. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The moment my key jammed in the front door of the house I'd owned for 40 years, I realized my only son was a monster. I stood there on the porch, the heavy brass key refusing to turn in the deadbolt. At first, I thought it was just the summer humidity warping the old oak frame, or maybe my 68-year-old hands simply losing their grip. But then I leaned in and looked through the familiar glass panes of the front window. My stomach dropped instantly into a bottomless pit. The vintage floral sofa my late wife and I bought back in 1998 was entirely gone. The heavy wooden bookshelf I had built by hand, which housed decades of memories, gone. In their place sat a sterile, ultra-modern gray sectional that I had never seen before in my life. How do you look at the house you paid off decades ago and realize you are suddenly a trespasser? I jiggled the handle frantically, the metal rattling against the wood. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Everything I owned, my entire life savings bound up in the equity of this 4-bedroom suburban home, my absolute sanctuary. It was all completely hijacked. I stood there shivering in the afternoon sun, a small canvas gym bag slung over my shoulder, holding nothing but 3 changes of clothes and a burning sense of utter disbelief. This was supposed to be my safe haven, my peaceful retirement. My son, David, was supposed to be watching the place. He was supposed to be watering the hydrangeas and bringing in the mail while I was recovering from a minor health setback. I had trusted my own flesh and blood to protect my sanctuary. Instead, he had completely scrubbed my existence from the very walls I had raised him in. The sheer audacity of the betrayal left me gasping for air. I peered closer at the window glass, noticing that even the framed family portraits had been stripped from the hallway walls, replaced by generic, staged art you would see in a cheap real estate brochure. I stumbled backward off the porch, my mind racing through 100 terrifying scenarios of financial ruin. I reached into my pocket for my cell phone, my hands trembling so violently I could barely unlock the screen. I dialed David's number, praying for a logical explanation. It went straight to a generic voicemail, exactly like it had for the past 2 excruciating weeks. I was completely locked out of my own life, stripped of my dignity, and standing on the street like a vagrant. Then I heard the distinct crunch of tires pulling into the driveway right behind my back. To understand how I ended up freezing on my own porch like a discarded piece of trash, you have to go back exactly 3 months. It all started with something ridiculously mundane, a loose rug in my kitchen and a misplaced step. I took a nasty tumble, banging my knee and badly spraining my ankle. I couldn't put any weight on it, so I called David to take me to the urgent care clinic. I was a healthy, fully independent 68-year-old man who still chopped his own firewood, but in that moment, I just needed a little help. David rushed over in his leased BMW, playing the role of the frantic, deeply concerned son to absolute perfection. His wife, Chloe, trailed behind him, wringing her hands and looking at me with this exaggerated pity that made my skin crawl. "Dad, you could have died," David practically shouted in the waiting room, pacing back and forth in his expensive designer suit. "You're living all alone in that massive house. What if you hit your head? What if nobody found you for days?" I tried to laugh it off, pointing out that it was just a sprained ankle, but David wouldn't let it go. He began a gentle, persistent campaign of gaslighting that slowly chipped away at my confidence. Every time I winced standing up, he was there, sighing heavily. Every time I dropped a fork, he'd exchange a worried, theatrical glance with Chloe. They made me feel like my mind and body were rapidly deteriorating before their eyes. "We just want what's best for you, Arthur," Chloe cooed softly one evening, pouring me a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. "David doesn't sleep at night worrying about your safety." The subtle manipulation was brilliant. They didn't attack my independence directly. They weaponized their love and concern to make me doubt myself. They convinced me that my beloved home was actually a dangerous death trap waiting to claim my life. I started feeling like a burden, an old man who was selfishly ruining his successful son's peace of mind. The seed of doubt was planted, and David was eagerly watering it with every single visit. I thought I was lucky to have a son who cared so deeply about my well-being. I had absolutely no idea he was actually measuring the house for his own financial funeral. A week after my fall, My ankle was still swollen, and I was mostly confined to my living room recliner. David came over on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a thick manila folder and accompanied by a stiff, quiet woman in a gray blazer who he introduced as a mobile notary. "Don't panic, Dad," David said smoothly, setting the papers on my coffee table with a reassuring smile. "It's just some routine medical consent forms. The urgent care clinic requires them, and since I'm helping coordinate your physical therapy, we need to make sure I'm authorized to speak to the doctors on your behalf." It sounded entirely logical. Why wouldn't my son need permission to deal with the stubborn insurance companies? He handed me a pen and began flipping through the pages, pointing to the little yellow "sign here" sticky notes. "Just standard HIPAA stuff, liability waivers for the physical therapists. You know how bureaucratic the healthcare system is these days," he chattered on, never letting the room fall silent enough for me to actually read the dense legal jargon. The notary stood silently by, stamping pages the second my pen left the paper. I was exhausted, in mild pain from the sprain, and I implicitly trusted my only child. How do you look your child in the eye when you realize they are waiting for you to die? You don't. You look at them and see the boy you taught to ride a bicycle. What David didn't tell me was that buried beneath the medical waivers was a sweeping, highly destructive document, a durable financial power of attorney. By signing on that dotted line, I was legally granting David complete, unquestioned control over all my assets. I was giving him the legal authority to empty my bank accounts, liquidate my retirement funds, and, most importantly, sell or mortgage my property without ever needing my permission or signature again. I was literally signing my entire life away on my own coffee table, completely blind to the trap closing around my ankles. David squeezed my shoulder affectionately as the notary packed up her stamps, his eyes gleaming with a strange, intense relief. He told me he loved me right before he executed the final phase of his trap. The very next morning, David showed up early with a packed suitcase. He announced he had secured a spot for me at a luxury rehab facility across town. "It's just for 2 weeks, Dad," he promised, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. "They have world-class physical therapists on staff. You'll get your ankle healed up properly, enjoy some catered meals, and come back home stronger than ever." He made it sound like an all-inclusive resort vacation rather than a medical confinement. I was hesitant, but the persistent throbbing in my leg and David's overwhelming pressure finally broke my resistance. I let him help me into the passenger seat of his car, locking my front door and handing him my spare key for safekeeping. The drive was unusually quiet. When we pulled up to the facility, my heart sank. It didn't look like a luxury resort. It looked like an expensive, sterile hospital masquerading as a hotel. The lobby smelled faintly of antiseptic bleach and stale institutional food. David hurriedly checked me in, speaking in hushed, urgent tones with the admissions director while handing over copies of the paperwork we had signed the day before. He bypassed the standard intake procedures with a terrifying efficiency. They wheeled me down a long, depressing hallway to a cramped room with beige walls and a single, tiny window overlooking a concrete parking lot. David didn't stay long. He awkwardly patted my good leg, promised to visit every single day after work, and practically sprinted out the door. The heavy fire door clicked shut behind him, and the oppressive silence of the facility instantly wrapped around me like a wet blanket. There was no bustling physical therapy center, no vibrant community of recovering seniors. It was a holding pen. The nurses were overworked and barely checked on me, leaving me isolated in my rigid, uncomfortable bed. When dinner arrived, a sad, lukewarm tray of unidentifiable mush, the crushing reality of my isolation finally set in. I was entirely cut off from my neighborhood, my routine, and my friends. I reached for the phone to call Helen, unaware the lines were purposely disconnected. The promised 2 weeks of intensive physical therapy came and went without a single significant improvement to my ankle. In fact, they barely offered me any therapy at all. 2 weeks slowly bled into 3, and then draggingly stretched into 4. The most terrifying part wasn't the terrible food or the suffocating beige walls. It was the deafening silence from my son. David's daily visits never materialized. At first, he would text me brief, sterile excuses. A big project at work, Chloe feeling under the weather, car trouble. But by the 3rd week, the texts stopped completely. Every time I called his cell phone using my own mobile device, it rang twice before dumping me straight into his generic, automated voicemail. I started to feel a creeping sense of panic clawing at my chest. I cornered a passing nurse one morning, demanding to speak to the facility director about my discharge papers. I explained that my 2 weeks were up and I needed to arrange transportation back to my house. The nurse looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, checking her digital tablet. "Mr. Vance," she said coldly, misreading my chart before correcting herself. "Arthur, your son submitted the medical and financial directives. According to your file, your placement here is classified as indefinite." The word hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Indefinite. They weren't treating an injury. They were warehousing me. I demanded to see the paperwork. When the administrator finally brought a copy of my file to the room, I saw the horrifying truth in black and white. It wasn't just a physical therapy order. It was a comprehensive care mandate authorized by the durable power of attorney I had foolishly signed in my living room. David had legally declared me incapable of managing my own daily affairs. He had used my minor slip and fall to strip me of my autonomy, locking me away in a high-priced nursing home while he held the absolute keys to my kingdom. My own son had effectively imprisoned me. I realized nobody was coming to save me, so I had to save myself. My salvation arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the form of Helen, my next-door neighbor of 20 years. She was a fiercely loyal, no-nonsense 66-year-old retired school teacher who never trusted David's slick demeanor. Helen had noticed the mail piling up and finally tracked me down by calling every single care facility within a 50-mile radius. When she walked into my bleak room, she didn't offer empty platitudes. She locked the door behind her, pulled a plastic chair close to my bed, and grabbed my hands. Her face was pale, her expression tight with genuine alarm. "Arthur, what on earth is going on?" she whispered frantically. "There are massive moving trucks parked in your driveway right now." The room spun. My ears began to ring with a high-pitched whine. "Moving trucks?" I choked out, my throat suddenly desert dry. Helen nodded rapidly. "Yes, 2 men in uniforms have been hauling out furniture all morning. I saw them carrying out your grandfather clock and the dining room table." I tried to ask David what was happening, but he completely ignored me and slammed the front door in my face. "Arthur, I think he is emptying your house." Pure, unadulterated panic surged through my veins, instantly burning away the lethargy of the facility. He wasn't just hiding me away. He was dismantling my entire life piece by piece while I was trapped in this sterile box. I didn't hesitate for another second. I grabbed my small canvas gym bag from the closet and started stuffing my 3 changes of clothes inside. A nurse walked in, holding a cup of afternoon medication, and immediately started yelling that I couldn't leave, citing the power of attorney directives. I looked her dead in the eyes, my voice booming with an authority I hadn't used in years. "I am walking out that front door right now," I growled. "And if you try to physically restrain me, I will scream kidnapping until the police arrive." I pushed past her, ignoring the throbbing pain in my healing ankle. Helen grabbed my arm, supporting my weight as we marched down the hallway. We stormed right through the sliding glass doors into the pouring rain outside. Helen drove like a maniac, her old sedan tearing through the suburban streets as the rain battered the windshield. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs with every passing mile. I was praying that Helen had somehow misunderstood the situation, that David was just replacing some old carpets or buying me a surprise gift. But the moment Helen's car turned onto my street, my final shreds of hope evaporated. The massive moving truck was gone, but the front lawn was littered with discarded boxes and random pieces of trash. I threw open the passenger door before the car even came to a complete halt, limping heavily up the concrete walkway toward my beloved porch. This brings us right back to that horrifying moment on the porch. I jammed my heavy brass key into the deadbolt, desperately trying to force the lock to turn. It wouldn't budge. The entire locking mechanism had been completely replaced with a shiny new keypad and a silver handle. I peered through the front window, seeing the stark white walls and the sterile, modern furniture that had violently replaced my 40 years of cherished memories. I was officially locked out of the house I had paid for with my own sweat and blood. I stood there shivering in the damp afternoon air, clutching my pathetic little gym bag, feeling a profound, crushing sense of betrayal that words can barely describe. That's when I heard the distinct crunch of expensive tires pulling onto the gravel driveway right behind me. I turned around slowly. David's sleek black BMW was idling in the driveway. He stepped out of the driver's side, wearing a crisp designer suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't look guilty, or panicked, or remorseful. The frantic, loving son routine from the hospital was entirely gone. His face was a cold, hard mask of absolute irritation. He casually clicked the button on his key fob to lock the expensive car, slowly walking up the driveway toward me with a terrifyingly calm demeanor. He looked at me not as a father, but as a minor, annoying obstacle. "What exactly are you doing here, Arthur?" David asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't even call me Dad. The sheer disrespect hit me like a physical slap to the face. "David, what have you done to my house?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and overwhelming grief. "Where's my wife's sofa? Where are the family photo albums? Why doesn't my front door key work anymore?" I pointed a shaky finger at the shiny new keypad lock. David sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose as if dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "It's not your house anymore," David stated flatly, his dark eyes devoid of any human empathy. "You are clearly incompetent. You wandered away from a secure medical facility against doctor's orders. That just proves my point." He casually adjusted his expensive silk tie. "I invoked the power of attorney last week. I legally transferred the title of this property into a trust that I control. I am staging the property for an immediate sale. The market is incredibly hot right now, and maintaining this massive, outdated dump is a severe drain on our family's finances." I stared at him, completely paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his words. He was actively erasing my existence to line his own pockets. "You stole my home," I whispered, the devastating reality finally taking root in my mind. "You tricked me into signing those papers so you could rob me blind." David's expression instantly hardened into a vicious sneer. "I am managing the assets legally, Arthur. If you don't get off my property this exact second, I will call the police and have you formally arrested for trespassing on a private construction site." He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his thumb hovering maliciously over the screen. "Go back to the care home where you belong, old man. You have absolutely nothing left here to fight for." I realized in that terrible moment that my only son was truly dead to me. Helen practically had to drag me away from the driveway to stop me from physically attacking my own son. I spent that first night sleeping on her cramped, lumpy floral sofa, staring blankly at the popcorn ceiling. I felt utterly broken. I felt foolish, naive, and incredibly old. I had worked 40 grueling years at the manufacturing plant, saving every spare penny, sacrificing vacations and luxuries, just to ensure my family would always have a secure roof over their heads. And my reward for a lifetime of honest, back-breaking labor was being discarded like expired milk by the boy I had sacrificed everything for. The grief was a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I listened to the grandfather clock ticking in Helen's hallway, the sound echoing the relentless passage of time. I thought about my late wife, Mary, and how furious she would be if she saw what David had become. She would be disgusted. By 2 in the morning, the overwhelming waves of sadness began to recede, leaving something entirely different in their wake. The profound grief slowly crystallized into a cold, hard, calculating rage. I sat up in the darkness, the springs of the sofa groaning beneath my weight. I was 68 years old, but I was not a helpless victim, and I was certainly not mentally incompetent. I still possessed my sharp mind and my fierce stubbornness. David thought he had brilliantly outsmarted a senile old fool. He thought that because I moved a little slower and trusted him implicitly, I would just passively roll over and die quietly in that sterile facility. He had drastically underestimated the man who raised him. I wasn't going to let him steal my legacy and destroy the safe haven I had built with my own 2 hands. I was going to tear his meticulously crafted scheme down to the very studs, no matter the cost. As the sun began to peek through Helen's curtains, casting long shadows across the living room floor, my plan began to form. I firmly resolved that I would utterly destroy my son's life to reclaim my own. The next morning, Helen was already brewing strong black coffee when I walked into her kitchen. "I called a friend," she said simply, sliding a steaming mug across the table. "His name is Mr. Vance. He specializes in elder abuse and property fraud, and he is absolutely ruthless." 2 hours later, we were sitting in Vance's downtown office. Vance was in his late 40s, wearing a sharp charcoal suit, with cold, calculating eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I laid out the entire story, detailing the urgent care visit, the deceptive paperwork, the forced facility stay, and the changed locks. Vance didn't offer sympathy. He offered immediate, aggressive action. He was a legal predator, and David was his new prey. "We need undeniable leverage, Arthur," Vance explained, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. "People don't commit massive, brazen fraud like this unless they are incredibly desperate. We're going to find out exactly why your son needs a $500,000 house this week." Vance utilized his legal access to pull deep public records, title histories, and court filings. We spent 6 grueling hours sifting through complex digital documents, piecing together the hidden truth of my son's glamorous lifestyle. The facade of the successful, wealthy executive began to crack and shatter right before our eyes. The financial reality we uncovered was absolutely devastating. David wasn't a successful businessman. He was a desperate gambler drowning in an ocean of toxic debt. We found 3 separate maxed-out secondary mortgages on his own heavily leveraged property. We discovered aggressive liens filed by aggressive private creditors and a trail of unpaid luxury car leases. He and Chloe were living a pathetic, fraudulent lie, funding their lavish vacations and designer clothes with high-interest loans they could never possibly repay. His entire existence was a crumbling house of cards, and the wind was finally picking up. My house wasn't just an asset to him. It was his final, desperate lifeline. We finally found the smoking gun in a massive, deeply buried stack of pending foreclosure notices. Vance slapped a thick stack of printed documents onto his mahogany desk, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Here is the exact motive, Arthur," he stated, pointing a sharp silver pen at a dense legal filing. "Your son is officially facing Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His primary residence is scheduled for a public foreclosure auction in exactly 14 days. The bank is aggressively coming for his house, his cars, and every single cent he possesses." I stared at the official court stamps on the paper, feeling a bizarre mixture of profound vindication and deep, sickening disgust. David wasn't just greedy. He was backed into a terrifying financial corner of his own making. But the most shocking document was the one Vance pulled from a local title company database. "He isn't just staging your property for a traditional sale," Vance explained, his voice lowering to a serious register. "A standard sale takes 60 to 90 days to close. David doesn't have that kind of time. Instead, he has aggressively applied for a predatory, hard-money cash-out refinance loan against the fully paid equity of your home. He is attempting to pull $400,000 in raw cash directly out of your property's value." My stomach violently lurched. He was going to strap a massive, suffocating mortgage onto the house I had painstakingly paid off over 40 years. "He used the fraudulent power of attorney to bypass your signature entirely," Vance continued, tapping the loan application. "He is scheduled to finalize this massive loan on Friday afternoon. Once he signs those closing documents and the lender wires the money into his private account, he will use your equity to save his own mansion from foreclosure. You will be left with an absolutely massive debt on a house you can't even enter, and the bank will eventually foreclose on you, too." The sheer, calculated evil of the plan was breathtaking. He was willingly sacrificing my entire future to buy himself a few more years of fake luxury. He was going to finalize the theft in less than 48 hours, unless we stopped him. "We could simply call the police right now," Vance mused softly, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "But elder financial fraud is notoriously difficult to prosecute quickly without rock-solid, irrefutable proof of intent. If we spook him now, David will claim it was a terrible misunderstanding, dissolve the loan application, and try another sneaky tactic later." I looked at the aggressive attorney, my own anger burning hot and bright. "I don't want to just stop him, Mr. Vance," I declared firmly, my voice steady and cold. "I want him to fall straight into his own trap. I want him to feel the exact same terror I felt on my porch." Vance grinned, showing a row of perfectly white teeth. "Then we set the trap," he agreed. Over the next 24 hours, Vance executed a brilliant, stealthy legal maneuver. He immediately drafted an aggressive emergency injunction to legally revoke the fraudulent power of attorney, proving my mental competence with a rapid, independent medical evaluation. But more importantly, Vance quietly filed a lease pendens, a formal notice of pending litigation, directly onto the title of my house at the county clerk's office. This hidden document acted as a legal landmine. It completely froze the property asset, making it absolutely impossible for any title company to legally issue the loan money. The true beauty of the trap was its absolute silence. David received no automated notifications. He had no clue the legal bomb had been planted beneath his feet. As far as my son knew, I was still helplessly crying on my neighbor's sofa, totally defeated. We intentionally let the title company proceed with drafting the final closing documents for the fraudulent cash-out refinance. We allowed the predatory lender to prepare the massive wire transfer. We let David believe he had flawlessly executed the perfect crime, letting him walk right up to the absolute finish line of his salvation. We arranged a very special surprise for his final signing appointment at the downtown bank. Friday afternoon arrived with a tense, heavy atmosphere. The downtown title company was a maze of sleek glass walls and polished marble floors. Vance had spoken privately with the senior branch manager, explaining the severe criminal fraud taking place under their roof. The manager, absolutely terrified of losing his corporate license, eagerly agreed to cooperate with our trap. At precisely 2 o'clock, Vance and I walked into conference room B. We sat down at the long mahogany table, completely hidden from the main lobby. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm, but my hands were completely steady. I was ready to face the monster I had raised. Through the frosted glass wall, I watched David and Chloe strut into the lobby. They looked incredibly smug, dressed in expensive designer clothing, acting like absolute royalty. Chloe was already excitedly scrolling through vacation destinations on her phone, clearly mentally spending the $400,000 they were about to steal from my life savings. A nervous junior clerk escorted them down the quiet hallway, pushing open the heavy glass door to the conference room. "The closing agent has your final documents ready," the clerk muttered, stepping aside to let them enter the room. David confidently strode into the room, a slick, arrogant smile plastered across his face. "Let's get this over with. I have a tea time at 4, he boasted loudly. Then, his eyes locked onto me sitting at the far end of the table. His arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated shock. Chloe gasped loudly, dropping her expensive leather purse directly onto the hardwood floor. "What the hell is this?" David stammered, all his smooth confidence instantly evaporating into the air. Vance stood up slowly, calmly buttoning his sharp suit jacket, fixing David with a terrifying, predatory stare. "Take a seat, David. We have some very important documents to review together right now." Vance didn't waste a single second. He immediately slammed the thick file of evidence onto the table. "David, this is a formal notice of revoked power of attorney, an emergency injunction, and a lease pendens completely freezing the asset," Vance announced loudly, his voice echoing in the glass room. "We know about your massive bankruptcy. We know about your impending foreclosure. And we have undeniable proof that you deliberately committed felony elder fraud and forged documents to initiate this illegal $400,000 loan." David physically stumbled backward, his face draining of all color until he looked like a panicked ghost. The walls were instantly closing in. Chloe frantically turned on him like a cornered wild animal. "You told me this was entirely legal," she shrieked, backing away from him as if he were highly radioactive. "You said your father gave us the house willingly." David desperately reached for her arm, but she slapped his hand away in pure disgust, realizing she was heavily implicated in a massive federal crime. David finally looked at me, tears of genuine terror welling in his eyes. He literally dropped to his knees right there on the expensive carpet. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice cracking pathetically. "Please don't do this to me. I'll lose everything. We are family. You can't send your own son to prison." I stared down at the pathetic, trembling man begging on the floor, and I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no love, no hesitation. "You stopped being my family the moment you locked me in that sterile facility and changed the locks on my sanctuary," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any emotion. You are just a desperate criminal who tried to rob an old man. I nodded sharply to Vance, who immediately pulled out his cell phone and dialed the local authorities. The bank manager had already locked the exterior doors to prevent any escape. David buried his face in his hands, sobbing violently as the terrifying reality set in. The distant, wailing sound of approaching police sirens slowly began to echo through the downtown streets. The legal fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely deserved. David was formally charged with multiple counts of felony elder fraud, forgery, and attempted grand larceny. His house was immediately foreclosed on, and Chloe swiftly filed for a very messy divorce, taking whatever miserable scraps were left of his life. I refused to attend his criminal hearings. I completely blocked his number, severed all ties, and watched from afar as the legal system dismantled him. I successfully regained the sole title to my beautiful home, thanks to Vance's relentless work. The very first thing I did when I returned was hire a locksmith to replace the keypad. I stood on my porch that sunny afternoon, watching the locksmith install a heavy, traditional brass deadbolt. When he handed me the brand new key, the heavy weight of the cool metal in my palm felt like the most incredible victory. I slowly moved my vintage floral sofa back into the center of the living room, completely erasing the sterile, modern nightmare David had created. The house finally smelled like old wood and warm memories again. Helen came over later that evening with a bottle of expensive champagne, and we toasted to my hard-fought freedom. I was battered, bruised, and emotionally exhausted, but I was firmly back on my own throne. If there is one absolute truth I want to pass on to anyone watching this, it is this: blood absolutely does not guarantee loyalty, and love should never be a blindfold. Protect your hard-earned assets with ironclad legal boundaries. Read every single document carefully before you sign your name, even if your own child is holding the pen. Aging does not mean you have to surrender your independence or your dignity to the greed of others. You have the absolute right to fiercely defend the sanctuary you spent your entire life building. Trust your gut, guard your kingdom, and never let anyone tell you that you are weak. I am a survivor who fought a monster and reclaimed the only home I ever need.